Chapter 16. Dishwasher Safe from the Bug. Growing up was sometimes a wondrous adventure, and at other times it was, well, it seemed to be closer to an experimental exercise that was never going to end well. I grew up with two older brothers who picked on me and beat me up for numerous reasons. Their favorite reasons, of course, were that I was simply alive, breathing, and that I was readily available. Allow me to explain what the word available in this context means, because both my brothers were believers in and supporters of the right to delegate. It could be anything, but mostly it was whatever they didn't want to do, or they deemed the lack called for task to be unworthy of their time. Well, as the younger sibling, this meant that I was the direct recipient of their rights to delegate, or in other words, I was the delegee. So with this in mind, the term available meant that I didn't necessarily need to even be present, because they would seek me out. Of course, there was one factor that surrounded the act of successful delegation, one that would ensure that things went smoothly, and that factor was singularly based on whether or not my parents were around. Our parents would delegate certain things to my older brothers, who in turn would pass these things down to me if our parents were then going to be gone for the evening. My parents would have no sooner gotten into the car and started to pull out of the driveway when I would hear my name. Now, I'm pretty sure, if memory serves me correctly, that this was close to one of the only times that my brothers actually used my name. In fact, before this, I was kind of wondering if they even knew who named the guy that they were roughing up. But this act towards my personal welfare always reminded me that yes, they did know. The obvious question then is, why didn't I just go into hiding, enroll in some form of federal protection, or simply move out of the country whenever I hear my parents making plans to be gone in the evening? I mean, any of those would have worked well as a solution to avoid the approaching unpleasantness, a solution which occurs to me now, but apparently it didn't back then. Well, the same pattern manifested itself so many times that when I look back on it now, I am very surprised at myself for not taking more preventative measures. It seems, though, that either I, one, forgot each time between each event, which I will chalk up as early stages of a faulty short-term memory, or two, I was an optimist, and I was always hoping that things would be different next time. They never were. There are two distinct memories that I have of those times, and both of those originate within the one larger memory. That overall memory was based on a central pattern, which served as the core framework for most of those memories. Just before they would leave for the evening, my parents would instruct the oldest brother that certain chores needed to be done by the time that they got home. It seemed that the dishes were always playing a pretty significant role in this, and that particular night, the counter just so happened to be full of dirty dishes that would need to be washed, dried, and put away. My parents didn't own an automatic dishwasher back then, but they did have several manual dishwashers, and my brothers in particular had a favorite one that they liked to use when my parents were not home. That's right, it was yours truly. And as soon as the folks were out the door, the ritual would begin. There was another part of the pattern that I had not mentioned yet, but one that played a significant role in that interaction. That part was the resistance that I forever seemed to be attempting. It always happened in the same way. I was told what to do, followed by my first refusal to comply. I would then endure at least 5 minutes of arm twisting and wrenching until I agreed that having me do all the dishes was a very good plan and in the best interest of all. Upon being released from the torture, I would regain my wits and run screaming that I would not do what had been so kindly suggested of me. The humanitarian-based torture would then be repeated in much the same way, at least 2 or 3 more times, until I had had enough. Regardless of this fact, though, my brother would always find it necessary to move on to the not-so-gentle persuasion phase. This stage was quite simple. My brother would pin me down with his knees on my shoulders, and he would let large globs of spit dangle from his mouth. These huge wads of spit would come within mere inches of my face before he would suck them back up again, temporarily diverting any impending disaster. And only a few times was he unable to retrieve the spit before it got away and landed on me. Finally, with my spirit broken and bruised a little more than normal, I would firmly give in to their demands. Well, the first memory that stands out is the time that my older brother skipped the painful arm manipulations, and instead he went straight into the threat of making me eat his dirty socks if I didn't do what he prescribed. I, unfortunately, thought this to be a pretty ridiculous and highly implausible threat, and so I rather naively called his bluff. But he did indeed pin me down, remove his dirty, smelly socks, and proceeded to shove them into my mouth. All I can remember is that they had a slightly nutty flavor, along with several other unpleasant and unidentifiable ones. And to this day, I still have a tendency towards cottonmouth that I believe has roots that go back to that event almost 45 years ago. Well, the second memory comes roughly out of the same time frame, but it involved the other brother. Now, his two favorite hobbies were playing with sharp knives and tormenting his younger brother, which is me. Often he would decide to cut out the middleman, as it were, by combining both of these things. And during this particular incident, he was waving a rather large butcher knife in my face. I had wisely chosen to back up until I couldn't back up anymore, because I was now against the wall, and the surface that had stopped me from going any further just so happened to be the stained glass window that her dad had installed beside the front door. Suddenly, and without any warning, I felt a sharp knee strike me sharply in a place that God had never intended for a boy to be struck. I violently doubled over, which unfortunately meant that my backside went straight through that stained glass. Yeah, Dad failed to see any humor in this, and among other punishments, my brother and I had to pay for a new window. The situations regarding my brothers, however, was not what I had come to fear the most during my growing up years. The possibility of contracting rabies was what the prevailing thought that kept me in the state of hyper-awareness. There seemed to be a lot of chatter surrounding this hateful disease back in the 70s and 80s, or so it seemed to be in my young mind. So much so that it appeared to me that every time I was turning around, someone was engaged in a conversation about a rabid animal, or statistics about how rampant the disease was and how likely you were to be bitten by an infected animal. The subject of rabies even seemed to invariably turn into a discussion about someone they knew who had recently started foaming at the mouth and contracted lockjaw. It didn't help that I grew up on a small farm either, and I had constant contact with animals. The images in my mind and the general air of rabies paranoia were not an overall encouragement either, because they're being highlighted and becoming the source of Hollywood fare, showcasing such family favorites as Old Yeller and the 1983 suspense movie Cujo. The most worrisome detail, and I think what freaked me out the most, was the dreadful and the painful cure to which one would be subjected. I wasn't ever really sure if there was any truth to these rumors, but the urban legend went that the only way to treat this disease was to undergo a series of injections. These shots were administered by the use of a large needle and went straight into your abdomen. The details of the cure might have been correct, but as a kid who hated needles of any kind, I hoped with everything that I could muster that I would never have to endure this. And apparently, they seemed to work out because I never did have to undergo that dreaded rabies needle. And eventually, I grew out of that paranoia and went on to other things. I remained worry-free concerning the possibility of contracting any form of disease until about the age of 38. I began to hear rumors of rare illness that had been labeled as the upright bug. The rumor was that those infected by that sudden and rare disease would begin to experience great balance, speak clearly, show signs of eating and drinking without choking, and have the dexterity to manipulate small objects and other physical non-difficulties. At the point in which I became aware of the upright bug, I also became aware of how common and widespread it had really become. However, before the root of worry even began within me, I learned that I had a natural resistance to the devastating disease. This particular form of immunity that had developed in my body had come to be known as spinal cerebellar ataxia, but was, as I quickly learned, just a small fraction of a larger group of uninfected people. There was a group of people who had come to be known as the exceptionally gifted, or the handicapped for short. I have since learned that there are several strains of the upright bug. One of those strains infects the host in the same general way as all the other forms, with good balance, etc., but which also develops within them a sense of jealousy, a sense of envy that is aimed towards the gifted. They begin to manifest this in two different ways. Either they just become downright rude and act arrogant to the point of cruelty in an effort to mask their true feelings of envy, or they begin to mimic the physically challenged and try to include themselves by taking on and assuming a certain degree of likeness to those who are truly handicapped. These manifestations appear to be rather pathetic, and one comes to almost pity this kind of upright infected. Their attempts at a pure life can be as simple as trying to park in a handicapped parking space. They may say that it is for their convenience, or they may appear to be completely rude, but I, for one, am not fooled at all. They park in those spots purely out of jealousy. They may also try to achieve a life of physical limitations by drinking themselves into an inebriated state. As they indulge, they celebrate and have fun because they know they are quickly approaching the gifted, but they always return to an infected reality. Their feeble efforts at impairment have proven to be only temporary. The headaches and the general hangover feelings that these people experience afterward are nothing more than the depression they feel upon this revelation. Another form of the upright bug is found in a group of individuals that have come to be known as the passionately reformed. This unique group is able to walk in both worlds. While dealing with some of the problems that rise in the upright bug world, they are also able to walk alongside the gifted, helping them, and then often entering into their world in a way that is truly amazing. The presence of the passionately reformed in my life serves as a constant reminder of what the upright people go through on a daily basis, and that helps to keep me humble. And my thoughts on that subject are continued in chapter 17.